Welcome to ILTV's Insider. I'm ILTV Editor-in-Chief Maayan Hoffman. A U.S. general has cautioned that if Israel launches a military offensive into Lebanon, it could provoke a response from Iran, which would defend the Hezbollah terror group. Additionally, the general noted that U.S. forces would face difficulties in strengthening Israel's air defense. The comment came amid increased rocket fire by Hezbollah, including an anti-tank missile on Sunday night that injured 2 members of the security team in a northern community of Metula, one of them seriously. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have threatened each other with an all-out war, one that could bring destruction to Lebanon or potentially destroy the state of Israel.
إذا فرضت الحرب على لبنان فإن المقاومة ستقاتل بلا ضوابط وبلا قواعد وبلا أسلحة.
אבל אחרי סיום השלב העצים, תהיה לנו אפשרות להעתיק חלק מהכוח צפונה. ואנחנו נעשה את זה. קודם כל למטרות הגנה, ושנית, כדי להחזיר גם את התושבים שלנו הביתה. אם נוכל, נעשה את זה בדרך מדינית, אם לא, נעשה את זה בדרך אחרת.
Are we going to war with Hezbollah? Should we go to war with Hezbollah? To answer these questions and more, I have with me today Avraham Levine, analyst from the Alma Center. Welcome, Avraham.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have with author and analyst Seth Frantzman. Thank you for being here, Seth.
Thank you.
Avraham, you've been studying and living the security situation in the north for more than 15 years and have served in and on the border with Lebanon. Knowing what you know, what are the primary factors that will determine whether the situation between Israel and Hezbollah escalates, and what does a full-scale war look like in the north in 2024?
Well, I'll start by saying that I think Hezbollah is holding in their hands the main trigger. One scenario could be an aggressive move on either side, or Hezbollah decide that they want to achieve one more advantage on Israel above and beyond what they already did with the evacuation of 60,000 people from the north, 43 communities. And I think Israel will wait for Hezbollah to trigger, for Hezbollah to be the aggressor. I don't see Israel starting a war out of nowhere, supposedly, even though we're under artillery for the past 8 months. The war would look like way worse than anything we've seen in 2006. Just multiply the numbers to the current artillery threat, which means 3,000 projectiles a day in the peak of a war against Hezbollah shot towards Israel. It means 1,000 a day for up to maybe 2 months of a war with Israel, some of it in Lebanon, some of it in Israel. Not all of it will hit in Israel. We obviously have our defense systems, the Iron Dome, shelters, sirens, and evacuate some of the people, but it will still paralyze and put in shelter 1 million to 1.5 million people in the north, and will actually affect the whole country in terms of the areas that Hezbollah can and will try to shoot at.
So, Seth, you and I were actually just in the north this week in Kiryat Shmona, which is now a ghost town with only 2,000 of its normally 24,000 residents. A member of the local security force showed us a crater that had been formed in the ground from a Hezbollah projectile, which he said the terror group actually has many more of and many new weapons than it had in 2006. Can you assess the current military capabilities of both Israel and Hezbollah, and how might they impact the outcome of a potential conflict?
Well, we've seen in the north that Hezbollah has been firing around 5,000 rockets, drones, and missiles over the last 8 months. So we're beginning to get a sense of the tip of the iceberg of what their capabilities are. I mean, they have reportedly 150,000 rockets that, some of them are old, some of them are new, some of them are long range. But they've been getting much more precise in terms of the use of their drones, for instance, targeting, Israel military infrastructure, bases, defense companies, all sorts of things. So we're starting to just get to see what they have. But I think Hezbollah is probably keeping some of that back. They have a lot of capabilities. They're a very dangerous organization. That being said, Israel, of course, is one of the most high-tech armies in the world. Israel has advanced, fifth-generation warplanes. Israel has all sorts of different types of technology. Israel has been training in the north to face Hezbollah. I think Israel now is aware of more of the types of capabilities Hezbollah has, and Israel has begun to see more of that, and therefore Israel can train to respond against it. In the end of the day, Israel can win a war against Hezbollah. The big question is always just going to be the price that Israel pays on the home front for winning.
Well, and of course, Hezbollah is backed by Iran, and the question is, how might Iran respond if the conflict breaks out? Is it, as General Brown says, Iran might physically step in to support Hezbollah, something we haven't seen the regime do in the nearly 9 months of our fighting with Hamas? Seth, why don't you take this one?
We have to think of Hezbollah as not just a proxy force, but something that Iran has invested in since the 1980s. It's like a very expensive piece on the monopoly board where you basically invest in a property and you build it up. I think Iran would never want to see that proxy force or that property that it invested in be destroyed by Israel. So therefore, we've seen that Iran is, I think, willing and is even messaging, if there's a war, Iran would step in. How will it step in? It can send Shiite militias from Iraq. It can operationalize militias in Syria. It can also, launch drones or missile attacks. Iran's military is not that strong, so the question of how it steps in is basically opening up more fronts against Israel, which it has already opened up. But that could lead to a regional war, and that's certainly a major concern.
So, Avraham, when I spoke earlier this week with Sarit Zahavi, the founder of your organization, Alma, she said that the residents of the North are already feeling traumatized. And, of course, this all-out war hasn't even happened. The sights and sounds, feel like their war is very imminent for them. What would be the immediate and even long-term impact on the civilian population in Israel if an all-out war did occur?
Well, the North is not one chunk. Although we're not a large area, I guess Israel from east to west is about 45 miles from one end to the other, from Rosh Hanikrat to the Golan Heights where I live. But there's very different stories. In the Golan Heights, we weren't evacuated. In the Western Galilee and Northern Galilee, all the communities close to the border were evacuated completely and are at hotels and dispersed all over the country. So the immediate effect is just that, but in more areas. More and more people in shelters, more and more people's out of school, out of jobs, companies closing, industries closing, and basically paralyzing the whole northern part of Israel, 1 million to 1.5 million people. I'd say the long term is the big question, because if we manage, even if we have to go to war, and we go in a ground operation, invade Lebanon, and thwart Hezbollah, push them back, disarm the southern part of Lebanon from Hezbollah weapons, then we could bring peace and quiet, safety for a few years to the north, just like we did in 2006.
Right, though I guess the question is it a few years that we want, or is it longer? I'm wondering also about diplomatic or potentially military strategies that could be employed to de-escalate the situation currently so that maybe we don't have to get to this war. Seth, can you start with that? Are there any ideas on the table? And then, Avraham, you can take it too.
I think, Israel's certainly trying the diplomatic route. It's been basically talking to the United States and France and other countries for many months, basically urging them to try to pressure Lebanon or Hezbollah or Iran, or what have you, to try to prevent and de-escalate the situation. Israel's messaging is it wants Hezbollah to basically move back from the border so that Israeli civilians feel comfortable returning. I think the history of Hezbollah shows us that usually any kind of diplomatic arrangement with them generally ends up being like one of those cup games where someone puts something in a cup and then moves cups around. And then in the end of the day, the thing is still right there where you always thought it was. So Hezbollah might pretend that it's going to leave, but it's probably not going to leave. So it's not clear if Israel can kind of save face this way. I think also, Israel and Hezbollah probably don't want a massive war. So it's plausible there could be a very short, smaller conflict, that maybe the messaging is that it will only last a week or something. I think those are options that exist, but it's going to be very difficult to thread that needle.
Avraham, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with Seth or have other ideas?
No, I agree with Seth. I think I might sound pessimistic, but if a war can give us several years, maybe 15 years already, since 2006, I think a peace agreement would be counted in months. I also don't trust Hezbollah. I also don't see any diplomatic effort with Hezbollah. The whole notion that Lebanon is the one we have to negotiate with is weird because Lebanon hasn't been attacking us for the past 8 months with over 200 attacks every month. So I don't think a piece of paper will eliminate the threat. I don't think people in Israel feel safe to go back home because Najib Mikati, Prime Minister in Lebanon, will sign a piece of paper with U.S. or with us, which I don't think will happen anyway.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly, there's been already a lot of tragedy on the border, and certainly soldiers getting injured and killed since the escalation began. Seth, you stayed up most of the night Sunday with the security team at a Golan Heights Moshav, guarding the gate and listening to their concerns, seeing how they live, what they fear. You were also there when they got the call about those two guys that, just like them, were severely injured. To that end, can you kind of tell us about that experience and humanize the conflict for our viewers?
Well, yes, I think a lot of communities in northern Israel, just like on the border of Gaza, they've been evacuated. So mostly what remains in those communities are these security teams, or what's called Kitot Konanut. And in some communities, you still have lots of residents living there. That's especially true in the Golan. People have not been evacuated in the Golan. But for the average people that are part of these security teams, October 6th or 7th has totally changed their lives. People have been called up to reserves. They basically have to do security. Some of them were doing security before anyway, but mostly no one thought ever, I think in their wildest nightmares, that they would, face a huge attack like October 7th. So now people in the north are beginning to, I think, prepare for that, and also prepare for any other strange scenario that can happen. I was able to, of course, spend some time, speaking with people, and also sitting up at night, and we could hear the artillery going on in the background in the Hula Valley, probably somewhere, basically responding to the attacks by Hezbollah and responding to this attack in Metula, in which 2 people were injured. And it was a surreal experience, because you're up at night, of course. Civilians have a right to stay in their homes and have their kids get up in the morning and go to school. But someone has to guard these communities. The army, of course, is one part of that, interlinked fence that guards them. But I think after October 7th, just a lot of people's concerns are different than prior to that. And people have a lot of fears about what comes next. And also, so many people have been called up to the army and spent basically 8 months or 9 months now in uniform. Is very difficult. Of course, they have lots of pride in terms of defending their communities, but it's difficult, I think, for a country to go on like that with people basically endlessly cycled in and out or endlessly called up.
Yeah, and I guess last question for both of you. You mentioned October 7th over and over, and sort of the difference between what you see on the north and you see on the south. So my question for each of you for final sentiments is, if we don't do an all-out war, if we don't either enter Lebanon or have a 2-3 week major escalation that will cause deterrence, are we looking at an October 7th on the northern border sometime, let's say, in the next decade? Avraham, why don't you start, and Seth, you'll finish.
I think that's exactly the fear of the people. I think people in the north are thinking about that day in, day out, and they're looking for a stronger solution. They're looking for a resolution that they'll feel safe to get back. And I'm not sure anything less than a ground invasion that will change the situation in South Lebanon. I don't think anything less will help.
Seth, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think historically people generally kind of plan for the last war. So, October 7th was a terrible disaster and massacre. It could have probably been prevented or reduced. I think in the north, we now understand more of what Hezbollah's capabilities are, but Hezbollah probably has a slightly different agenda in terms of how it might attack than Hamas. I mean, Hamas's goal was primarily just to massacre civilians and rape and kill and take hostages. I think Hezbollah's plans are probably different, and I think that they're more precise, and they'll want to attack IDF military positions more to show that they can actually defeat the Israeli army. So I think people, of course, should be afraid and they should prepare. I don't think we'll see an October 7th type of attack. I think we'll see a whole totally different type of massive attack that unfortunately we probably also have not prepared or planned for. So unfortunately, that's just how wars work.
Well, thank you for ending on such a positive note, Seth. I want to thank you, both Avraham Levine and Seth Frantzman, for being here today. It's been really interesting to hear your analysis. I now have a very important guest to wrap up our program in the studio, Doron Markel, the chief scientist for Karen Kayemet to Israel, KKL. Good to see you, Doron.
Thank you.
So I understand that there have been just thousands and thousands of dunams that have been destroyed by these Hamas rockets and other aerial projectiles. Can you tell us the details, what number, and put it into perspective for us?
Yeah, the situation within the forest fires in the Galilee is very severe. About 1,600 hectares, which are 16,000 dunams of forest fires, have been burned almost totally, and it is double the area that had been burned back in the Second Lebanon War in 2006.
So, and then what about the Carmel forest fire? I remember that there have been a lot of comparisons to that as well. I think people probably remember that from a few years back.
Yeah, the Carmel forest fire was larger, but still, this fire is large, and I should say that most of the forest that was burned is Kekel-Genev's forest, like the famous Beria forest near the city of Tzefat.
Wow. So a lot of the work that you've done is sort of being undone. Tell me about that, the specific ecological damage that Hezbollah rockets have caused to the trees, the forests. What are the long-term consequences on our ecosystem as a result of these fires?
Yeah, the environmental impact on the forest has three main ways. The first is the fact that during the fire, a lot of CO2 carbon is released to the atmosphere, damaging our carbon balance. And I should say that the carbon balance is a main issue in the battle against the climate crisis. Second, the forest itself is still the main tool humanity has in order to sequestrate the carbon back again to Mother Earth, where it was taken from. So this tool was burned, demolished, and it should be recovered, but it will take a long time to recover it. And the third has to do with the ecological system of the forest. This unique ecological system was burned and damaged. It's not only the trees, but also the fauna and flora and the wildlife habitat that was burned. Think about these nesting birds. Think about these nests that were burned.
Right, and the northern area is actually quite famous for its birds in the Hula Valley, and also there's a lot of biodiversity because a lot of our nature takes place in the north. So are you finding that these systems are getting aggravated? Within
the forest, there is a unique ecological system. As I said, the wildlife, the special fauna and flora, and it is damaged. It's not the Hula Valley, it's the forest.
No, of course, I'm just saying the area has a lot of special birds and special animals. It's an area that's known for its agriculture, so I was just wondering if that's going to impact us long term, because if these animals are impacted, won't that impact all others in the area?
So regarding the wildlife, we expect for long-term consequences.
So I guess last question, the Hezbollah rocket fire is a form of environmental terrorism in some sense, in that it's causing fires, destroying our area. If you think back to the time in the south with all of the balloons, the fire balloons and the fields that they destroyed, it's not so dissimilar, even though it's a rocket attack versus a balloon. So what can we do about it? Is there any international leverage, anything we can do in order to stop this kind of environmental terrorism?
Look. We are Kekel-Genève. We deal with our forest. In the short term, what we can do is mainly damage control, and that's what we do. Together with the fire authority, we try to extinguish every fire as soon as possible. Although it is very difficult during the war situation in the Galilee. But in the long term, the forest should be recovered and rehabilitated, and it will take, as I said, a long time. It's not something that you can do in 1 or 2 months.
So, how many years are we set back? How long will it take to plant those trees?
We're speaking about years. Look, the forest of Beria was hurt dramatically during the Second Lebanon War back in 2006. It recovered, and now 18 years later, it hurt again, and it will take years and years to recover the forest back again. But I assure you that we don't give up. We will recover and rehabilitate the KKJNS forests.
And the firefighters that you're mentioning, are they working under fire themselves? Obviously, there are fires burning, but there are rockets coming down at the same time. So how do they manage to do that?
That's why I said it is very difficult. So sometimes the workers just cannot go out there and treat a fire. When they can, they do it.
Understood. Well, thank you so much for that feedback, Doron. I think that the environmental terrorism aspect of all of this and the impact on our environment, in addition to the impact on the humans who are living in the environment, is actually something we don't think about enough. So, well, with that, we have actually run out of time for this evening. Thank you to our guests, of course, Avraham Levine, who was on before, and Seth Frantzman, as well as Doron Markel, who joined us from KKL JNF. For more updates of the latest from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at ILTV.tv. Thanks for watching. Let's win this war and bring our hostages home.